All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathleen Schatzman, Strategic Legislative Affairs Manager with the Animal Legal Defense Fund. We want to welcome you to the second panel discussion on the final day of the Animal Law Symposium. We're going to be talking today about state confinement laws and the future of farmed animal policy. A reminder that the symposium is being recorded and will be shared with you later via email. As you're listening today, please enter any questions that you have into the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. This session features closed caption subtitles. To enable this feature, click the upward arrow near the CC button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles. Please take a moment to answer the poll question that is appearing on your screen, as I am doing right now. If you're seeking continuing legal education credits for this session, please click yes. Attorneys seeking credit will receive information via email after the symposium concludes. And if you have any questions about CLE credits, please email us at events@aldf.org. So I would like to begin by introducing our esteemed panel for our conversation today. Alexandra Bukis, Senior Manager of U.S. Government Affairs, Farm Sanctuary. Matt Roselle, Campaigns Manager, Animal Legal Defense Fund. And Gabriel Wilgen, Director of Public Policy, the Humane League. Please note you can find their extensive bios on our website. So to begin, we've heard some really great conversations over the last 2 days regarding farmed animal protections. And we're now going to discuss the future of farmed animal confinement bans at the state level, what is anticipated at the federal level with the current Farm Bill process underway, and the role that you, as an advocate, can play in protecting and advancing state and local laws to protect farm animals. And Alex, it would be wonderful if we can start with a question for you. In the previous panel, it was discussed how there's a push to include the detrimental EATS Act language in the Farm Bill and our current efforts to make sure that doesn't happen. Looking a bit broader, what protections for farm animals can we anticipate in the Farm Bill given the current process? And if the Farm Bill continues to be delayed, what other federal legislation can we make progress for farmed animals?
That's such a great question. I really appreciate you tying the start of this session to what folks heard coming right out of the last one. So as I think many people may know, we don't have, federal farmed animals protections really codified in federal legislation right now. And unfortunately, aside from the Humane Slaughter Act, which already excludes birds and other animals. So when we look at the Farm Bill, one of the things that we have to do is try to establish marker bills and other bills that can attempt to bring animals into the conversation for protection at the federal level. One bill that's done that was Earl Blumenauer introduced the Food and Farm Act last spring, which looked to show people what a farm act that includes protections for animals might look like. And now when we look at the EATS Act, all of the work we've been doing at the federal level across organizations is to prevent the inclusion of that bill language in the Farm Bill. And so if we look at the work that's been done, back in August, 30 U.S. senators announced their opposition for the inclusion of that bill in the 2023 Farm Bill, which is also the 2024 Farm Bill, as we're waiting for that language and for that bill to come to fruition. And also 172 members of the U.S. House of Representatives signed on in a letter addressed to the House Agriculture Committee opposing the inclusion of the EATS Act. And so the focus of work right now on the Farm Bill is for organizations to lobby Congress and show representatives and senators that we have widespread support across coalitions against this language, while at the same time trying to prevent, the worst harms, to show bills that can, work to protect farmed animals. And while those haven't been included in the Farm Bill, we do continue to lobby for them. And I'm happy to share some examples of federal standalone legislation that are working towards that end. As you mentioned, Unfortunately, right now, the Farm Bill is not the piece of legislation that we expect to make significant progress, but I'm going to rattle off a few here because there have been a number of great bills introduced. We have the Farm System Reform Act from Senator Booker and Ro Khanna, and that places a moratorium on the large concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, if you will. The Industrial Agriculture Accountability Act from, again, Senator Booker and now Representative McGovern. So those are bills that are looking at industry accountability that represent industry harms to farmed animals. And so while we can introduce those bills for farmed animal protections, we also have bills introduced that try to fortify plant-based food production, because while we work to create a system that limits the harms to animals, we also have to build the alternative plant-based food system that we want to see that can still continue to feed people around the country. And so a few of those bills I want to highlight are the Plant Act from Representative Jim McGovern, which creates a beautiful blueprint to direct USDA to better invest in plant-based foods, in addition to the Food and Farm Act, which, as a beautiful example of a better farm bill, also includes those support for plant-based foods. And so that's where we're organizing a lot of our work on in terms of how we build the good while we work to protect farmed animals from the EATS Act.
And it's extraordinary to have so many proactive bills introduced as well. Do you see that as a direct result from the state work and having this interest, in more federal opportunities?
I think so. I think, we often see that federal legislation moves much more slowly than work, than work that we see at the municipal or at the local and at the state level. And so when we have excellent work happening in states around the country, it can build momentum when we see work that's being done that can be replicated at the federal level. And it also allows us, when we're talking to federal policymakers, to show them examples of what's been working in states that we should be able to bring to a larger scale. And that can represent shifts in billions of more dollars, right, to shift the food system to be more just and compassionate and sustainable. So I think there's so much collaboration among state and federal folks working in animal protection. And so that kind of cross-movement collaboration at the different levels also allows us to strategize and think through, what kinds of bills might we be able to run in California or in New York, or in also states where we have agriculture, primarily focused in the Midwest, to then replicate that at the federal level and just point to successes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. And Gabe, a quick question for you as well. If our movement does succeed in protecting state sales bans in the Farm Bill and in court, what strategies might be needed or are already in play to continue achieving that state level success with bans?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, our movement is not waiting around to see what's going to happen with the EATS Act. We're optimistic that we're going to be able to win that battle if we stay on top of it. So we're already going ahead and continuing to try to get more state level bans. So just this current legislative session that we're in, there's been a coalition of organizations working in 2 states, Maryland and Illinois, to try to get confinement bans passed and sales bans passed for caged eggs specifically. And unfortunately, we weren't able to move those bills quickly enough through the legislative process in those states. But there's other states as well that we can try in next year, as well as getting another kick at the can in Maryland, Illinois. So a big part of the strategy is just going to be, we've got a lot of states left. We still, have a minority of states that have these confinement bans and sales bans. So we just got to keep moving forward. Part of the challenge, though, is that the confinement bans that we've achieved so far are in states where we can do ballot initiatives. And we haven't had to do a ballot initiative in every state. Our movement has shown that we can win at the ballot box in California and Massachusetts, or we had these landmark wins with Proposition 12 and Question 3. But the effect of those wins, we were able to magnify and by going to other states where we could threaten ballot initiatives. Now that we can credibly show that as a movement we can win, And then we can often negotiate with the industry to come along with us when talking to legislators to say, look, do you want to negotiate with us and how these confinement bans and sales bans should look like, or do you just want us to go to the ballot box and we'll do it exactly how we want to do it? So we're going to need to continue with that strategy moving forward, but it's going to get more difficult the further we get down the road because not every state has ballot initiative possibilities. So hopefully we can build enough momentum with the states where we do have that threat and where we will maybe have to mount additional ballot initiatives. And hopefully we'll get to a tipping point where we can get more and more farmers and companies asking for this from the states and just create a sense of inevitability as we build momentum and hopefully one day even get to a federal confinement ban.
Yeah, you know, we've heard a lot in some of the other panels as well about the success that we've had, being in large part to working with unlikely allies, and whether it's trade groups, the industry, farm bureaus, and so, you know, with those state bans, do you think that this is opening up the avenue to continue with that strategy for engagement, and not just, you know, the threat of a ballot, but really being open to working with folks that we would have thought were straight opposition a few years ago? Perhaps because of all of the success, they're more likely now to entertain a conversation.
I think so. I mean, you know, when it comes down to it, human relationships are so key. It's important that we never see someone as black and white or a certain group as like either are totally our opponents. You never know, you might be able to find a common point of interest or shared motivations. And so I think it's important we be building relationships with farmers, with the large food companies that are buying these products, and with farm bureaus even, and of course with the legislators that sit on the agriculture committees that make the biggest decisions when it comes to these kinds of bills. So I do think there's a lot of hope. You know, we're up to 40% of the eggs are now cage-free in the United States, and that's a huge leap from where we were 15 years ago. And more large companies, like even McDonald's, you know, going cage-free. And I do think over time we can create this sense of this is just the way society's going. This is the way the industry is going. And the more allies we can bring along with us, we can build momentum and have it snowball to the point where it does feel inevitable. But it's often going to take building those relationships. And if that doesn't work out, sometimes using more strong arm tactics, like we sometimes have to do with corporations, you know, like kind of publicly shaming them for not going along with the movement that we've seen from other corporations and from other states, state governments. But I think always beginning with a friendly outreach and trying to find that common points of interest, and even just speaking to people's humanity and common decency about how much cruelty is involved in these products. You never know who might be in a position of power at the right time to help change things in a significant way when you wouldn't have expected it.
Yeah, for sure. And Matt, kind of going along those lines, because we've seen so much progress at the state level, you know, we talked a bit about federal, state, and now what actions might be taken to strengthen protection for farmed animals at the local level.
Well, there are some exciting examples of local legislative advocacy for farmed animals. We see right now in Denver, a coalition of advocates have secured signatures for a ballot initiative there to ban slaughterhouses. And this would specifically affect one business, which is the largest slaughterhouse for lambs in the state that estimates that kill 500,000 lambs per year. Also, along those lines, in Sonoma County, California, a ballot initiative process is underway aiming to prohibit CAFOs there. Confined animal feeding operations, and this would affect around 24 CAFOs in the county, including those raising chickens for eggs, dairy cows, and those raising chickens and ducks for slaughter. And then in Wisconsin, there was an example where 5 small towns passed regulations on CAFOs to protect their own environment and their own backyard and their own public safety when the pig ag industry was threatening to bring the largest pig farm in the state thus far with 26,000 pigs. And so there has been some industry pushback on this particular campaign. One of the cities has gone back on those regulations after a lawsuit and some other things, but this really does show an example of how communities can stand up to protect their own environment against the harms that come with this industry. And we're also seeing some creative resolutions, like here in Los Angeles, where I live. Back in 2022, our city council passed a resolution to support the Plant-Based Treaty Initiative. This is aligned with the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, which targets food systems to combat the climate crisis. And LA being the largest city that has done this thus far among 26 cities across the world, which have also done that. Just to be clear on the difference between resolutions, ballot initiatives, and local local ordinances, a resolution is a non-binding resolution. So it's more just the local legislature is expressing an opinion or a will to do something, or as opposed to like codifying a law, which a ballot initiative or ordinance can do. But because of that, it can be a lot easier to pass a resolution, and it can be an initial step towards passing an ordinance or to raise awareness about a state initiative that's being discussed, or even like an international effort, as is the case with the LA resolution. And so I just would love to talk a little bit about what folks can do in their own communities, because it's really important as a local concerned advocate to start a trusting relationship with your local elected officials. It can really go a long way. These local lawmakers need to hear from you. They work for you, essentially, and it's easier than you might think to contact them and actually have some influence over the local legislation. I would, it just starts with a phone call or an email to their office. You can set up a meeting. And if you're at all inclined to work on local legislation, you're curious about it, I would really encourage you to get more involved in local citizen lobbying. You can reach out to me at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. It's likely that other like-minded people in your community may already be working on something, and we can help you possibly get in touch with them, other groups and individuals. These efforts really can trickle up if we can pass local legislation. We've seen this in other jurisdictions where a lot of local ordinances will pass and it leads to something happening at the state level, and even down the road to create the impetus for federal legislation. So I would just say that working on local legislation is very accessible to people. It's a very fulfilling way to make a difference for farmed animals. Here at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, we do a lot of webinars, and this is one of our topics. So you can go to our website. We have a library of previous webinars you can watch on demand. And these will teach you things like how to find your elected officials if you don't already know, finding out what animal protection laws already exist in your community. And you can kind of learn from beginning to end how an idea for an ordinance leads to it being introduced, and through the entire process to eventually becoming a law. So check out our website. It's aldf.org/webinars. And you can, if you find one that I participated in, you can even find my email address there, and you can get in touch with me that way.
Shameless plug. That was a shameless plug, man. But I think you make such a strong point here, and that is for advocates, for constituents to get involved, and really the importance of establishing that relationship with legislators, local, state, and federal, because that's really half of the equation in the work that we do as nationals and local organizations, all of us really banding together to work on this. It really is essential to have somebody on the ground, to have somebody who, could elect and vote in an animal-friendly legislator. Just going to pause for a moment. Here's a friendly reminder for everyone. If you're not yet registered to vote, please do so. It's probably one of the single most important things that you can do to ensure that we have animal-friendly policymakers in place for the animals. And so agree, I think all of our organizations work so closely with people on the ground, with our supporters and constituents, and everybody has their own network as well. So bringing everybody together for this unified voice really amplifies our collaborative message for the animals, which is ultimately, who we're all working to protect. Alex, with federal work, it is clearly takes a lot longer to pass potentially than local or state legislation. And those are in good times. Right now and, for the near future, what are your thoughts on the timing for passing any of the proactive legislation, again, outside of the farm, anything in the Farm Bill? And then what might be some challenges or obstacles faced by advocacy efforts seeking to enact those farm to animal confinement bans, and how might they be addressed?
Yeah, great question. So I think, you said it's potentially sometimes something that takes a long time. I think that's right. And it's also realistically something that takes a long time at the federal level. And so, when we look at those bills, oftentimes what we think of as progress, unfortunately, at the federal level is about awareness, about legitimization of the issues, about, members of Congress being aware, being briefed, having had multiple conversations about the necessary protections or bans, depending on whether, we're advancing a policy that we want to support or something we want to protect against. Sometimes we talk about lobbying as policymaker education. And I think that's really sort of the approach that we have to take right now, because where we are at right now at the federal level, the bills that I mentioned that have been introduced, we see widespread support from constituents calling their representatives and senators. It's a big tent as well. The bills that we advance are not just animal organizations speaking up for them. It's groups who work in health, in environmental protection, in nutrition, even in small business, right? Standing up for smaller farming operations and trying to prevent the monopolies of the largest industry consolidators from having a large hand in this movement. And so that's our biggest chance at the federal level. That's our greatest opportunity. It's also our greatest strength that we can do this work all together in coalitions. And so while realistically, when we introduce a bill at the federal level or working to lobby for one, we may not expect it to be passing that year or the year after, but it's building blocks that if we introduce it this year and by the next year it has a number, like a couple dozen more co-sponsors and folks are talking about it and it's accepted as and understood as a strong issue that policymakers should be aware of. We're building a vision where 5 to 10 years we could have those bills passed. Now, that's sort of the vision for a standalone bill. However, what we do have as a more realistic opportunity is to take language from some of those bills that we can try to pull into existing legislation, such as the Farm Bill or others sometimes. There's appropriations processes and other standard processes at the federal level in Congress, where we can try to move some of that language into a bill especially the ones that might have the most bipartisan support. So there is some people may not know, at the federal level, there is a bipartisan caucus for animal protection. And while most of the folks on that are Democrats, there are 16 Republican members. And we often talk about animal protection and also food and farming as policy issue areas that are historically bipartisan. Food is something that brings people together, both on Capitol Hill and at the dinner table. And we see that the Agriculture Committee is very bipartisan. And there are members, Gabe was speaking about talking to people as people and appealing to their humanity. A lot of people do care about animals. And so part of our jobs is to make it easy for them to engage on that instinct or on that draw. Like, let's put together a bill that folks from both sides of the aisle can say, yes, we can move that forward now. And because we have constituents calling us for that, it's a big tent coalition work. And also we can continue lobbying on that more blue sky bill that all of us on this call might want to see passed. So that's sort of how we look at that. Could you remind me of your second question? I got so into talking about timelines. I want to make sure I answer that accurately.
Of course, I'm just wondering for any potential obstacles or challenges, how might we be able to address those? And by the way, it's just wonderful to hear of the bipartisan support. We see that in so many other areas of animal protection. It is very good to know that there's support for this issue as well for farmed animals.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, the strongest obstacle I think that we often just face is the power in Washington, D.C. that the agricultural industry has as lobbying power, right? And so, because for every amazing organization that might have an in-house lobbyist or a couple of folks working at the federal level and state level, there are dozens of folks on Capitol Hill to represent industry. So that's where, again, we have to lean on the millions of people who support the issues and our missions and our advocacy. That's where our power lies. And so that obstacle is just that, it's often business as usual when it comes to some of these policies. And so we have to try to come up with sometimes more creative and wonky ways to bring our issues to the table so that Congress doesn't default to continuing to pass for example, the same farm bill that we've passed that's really, focused on SNAP, which is critical, and support for farmers, but also to say, we need to start making a bill that's more willing to talk about animal protections and environmental protections and true nutritional security. So that's one barrier, and also just timelines. This farm bill, we're not sure you're going to get one this year. And oftentimes federal legislation drags on. And so that's where we can look to, again, the state legislation and the work happening in local communities to look for those short-term wins as we can continue to just hope to make progress at the federal level.
Well, before we move on to state, I do want to just make mention, because you're talking about some of the other bills that might not be as straightforward for farm animal protection. And I always, feel like for all of us in the movement, we always have to pivot. If we can't go in for the front door, we're going to find a side door, back door, a window that's open. And so are there any non-traditional bills, or do you think there may be more opportunity with non-traditional bills to garner support? Be it biosecurity or labor, even, non-welfare farming regs or invasive species, et cetera, environmental sustainability, public health. And I ask this in part in light of the first human case of bird flu. I feel like we've got to make mention of that with the dairy worker in Texas who tested positive for H5N1 avian influenza. You would think, coming out of COVID, and again, not making any connection to that, but that we would be hypersensitive as a society and think that the human health aspect alone of factory farming should be a compelling enough argument for enacting farm animal welfare policy. Is that something that you're having conversations with members of Congress on the Hill?
Absolutely, all the time. I think when we look at, and this is where oftentimes we can get in the door, right? Is, we come, of course, very open and transparent about where we stand as an organization and what our values are. But when we look at industry and the harms that it represents. It's to human health, it's to local air and water pollution, it's public health, as you mentioned, with the CDC saying that 3 out of every 4 new diseases are zoonotic in nature, coming from animals. So that is absolutely where sometimes we can gain some overlap just right out of the gate on issues where we align. And to give you an example, you asked about some creative bills that have been introduced that go across those multiple issue areas. There is one that is more welfare focused, which I'd actually love to just mention, might have mentioned it before, but the Transparency and Depopulation Act. And that is one where, say there's a outbreak of bird flu or another disease that's in a farming operation, that bill would prevent federal funding from being used for some of the most inhumane methods for slaughter, which is something really difficult to talk about, but that can be gassing, of a huge farming operation to kill those animals. And so even just preventing the worst harms in cases of an outbreak that you're talking about of zoonotic disease or others is really important. And so that's not necessarily making the animals' lives better as they're being raised, but just trying to have the most humane treatment when the worst case scenario does happen. So that's one I want to mention. And then there are others, like if we look to the Farm System Reform Act or the Industrial Agriculture Accountability Act, for the Accountability Act, we're looking at legislation that would place the liability for disaster mitigation on corporations and on industrial operators by requiring them to register with USDA and to submit disaster preparedness plans in case something does happen, and to establish a fund on disaster events. And so looking at a bill like that, we're saying, let's hold industry accountable, right? When there are disasters that come, whether those affect local air and water pollution or represent a public health risk, we see a lot of death, unfortunately, right now nationally in terms of statistics from air pollution among human populations living close to factory farms. And so focusing on those where it might not be for animal welfare, like explicitly on paper in the policy, but we are working to make industry operate better, can get us on the pathway where overall we're trying to shape the ways that they operate. And hopefully at some point that will include something that is much more animal welfare focused. But for right now, building consensus around focusing federal efforts on accountability is one of the more creative ways that we've seen some progress.
Really appreciate that answer. And I think everybody should be outraged that our tax dollars are being used in so many forms of animal cruelty, but this in particular, depopulation, is an area that our organization and so many, again, of the national organizations are working on, and appreciate that you made mention of those. Just to transition a bit, Gabe, to some state work as well. And the previous panel had discussed federal efforts to negate state level progress for farmed animals. Oftentimes, we are also opposing state bills that could decrease farmed animals' already limited protections or be further detrimental to their well-being. Could you speak a bit on the work that is being done in opposition to some bills and perhaps some states that are surprising us with the work that they're doing, which again, we wouldn't normally see happen?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we're seeing in various states efforts to roll back the more local control over CAFOs. So like Matt was saying, often you can it's a lot easier to get things done quicker at the local level, the county level, the city level. But we've been seeing more and more states. If you look at right now, for instance, one of our members of our Animal Policy Alliance at the Humane League, the Missouri Alliance for Animal Legislation, they're needing to protect the county's powers within Missouri to regulate factory farms. Because if you look at all the 8 states surrounding Missouri, those states have already taken away county powers to do that. And we're also seeing more and more right to farm laws across the country that are preventing just citizens from being able to sue factory farms for polluting the air and waterways around them, giving them exemptions to nuisance laws. So yeah, there's a lot of effort at the state level to protect factory farms and allow them to continue not just abusing animals on their farms, but polluting the communities around them. And so I think we're seeing a lot of backlash and rising movement of concerned citizens around the country at the state level, rallying against these kinds of laws. We're also, of course, seeing more increasing efforts to prevent filming of factory farms using drones, more and more ag-gag laws that are preventing activists from filming what's going on these farms and showing the public, which is, of course, such an important tool in our toolbox for gaining public support for more laws that protect animals and protect our environment. So it's constant war of attrition. We're going back and forth. And there's also ongoing efforts at the state level where we have made gains to try to repeal some of the confinement bans. Like in Utah, there was recently an effort to try to undo the confinement bans in Utah. And they ended up settling on delaying the implementation date instead of just outright undoing the confinement ban. But we have to stay vigilant and continually play defense as well as offense in this struggle that's going to be the rest of our lives, I would imagine, and future generations as well, because we're up against such a powerful industry. But I think it also speaks to how powerful our movement has become, despite having so much fewer resources in this multi-billion-dollar industry. There just are so many people impacted in different ways, and so many people that care about the suffering of farmed animals and can, even if they're not, an animal rights activist or wouldn't identify as one, they can see that it's common sense that it's just cruel and unacceptable to keep animals in cages so small that they can't stand up and turn around and spread their wings, for instance. So yeah, it's going to be a long fight, and we're having to stay vigilant across the country, and it's tough. 50 states. That's a lot of legislation to be tracking, and that's why it's important that more and more people, like Matt was saying, get involved at the local level. Also, pay attention to what's going on at your state legislatures. And also, continually follow organizations like ALDF and Farm Sanctuary and the Humane League who can alert you to what's going on at the state level and local level, and ensure that you're ready to speak to your legislators to turn them against the bad bills and to support the bills that are more progressive for animals that we're all working towards.
Yeah, so true. Unfortunately, there is no shortage of interest in introducing, terrible farmed animal protection bills in certain states, where a few states may have the legislative trifecta in their favor. And again, funding's not an issue. Even if there is a challenge against a certain law. I just, want to make mention of two things. We're not going to get into it, but, for farmed animals, some things just for the future, they're currently happening already, but biogas, factory farm gas, and the methane digesters and funding for those, as well as animal feed additives. And I think both are tragic, and we're keeping an eye on those and creating strategies for how to address and then actively opposing, again, those terrible additives as well. That's not the solution, just to kind of greenwash the issue. But Gabe, you did mention, some getting into like how the advocates can assist a bit more. And Matt, I want to transition to you for a moment, because I do feel like when we're talking about this opposition, it could feel overwhelming for individuals to know just how they can make a difference. And I'm hoping you'll share some inspiring words on what advocates can do in their own community to help expand protection for farmed animals. And not just in their community. I mean, all of this really does go, build upward in the cycle.
Yeah, and it's very encouraging to see all the people show up for this symposium. We're all part of this grassroots movement that is working collectively with all these other organizations in coalition to pass these bills. And so As you all know, you're all on the email list. You get these action alerts. These are really important to do. The click-through emails are timed specifically for the most impact when that legislation needs that push. It's trying to, we're trying to get something out of committee, trying to get a vote. And so don't stop doing the click-through emails. But we do also like to look at data about what is the most effective forms of activism for individuals to take. And one of the places we've looked is an organization called the Congressional Research Service. And they've done some surveys with legislative staff and have asked these questions about what types of actions individuals take that have the most influence on legislators that they work with. And I think the best way to sort of summarize that is just to say that in general, the more personal the contact, the more effective it is. And so when you get that email alert and you can just click through and take a second, take that extra time. If you can, personalize the subject line, take the message and personalize that as well. We've seen some advocates using AI technology to their advantage, actually, and you can just copy that language out of the action alert, put it in Chat GTP, and ask the program to reword it for you. And then just look over the edits. It can just take a couple of seconds. So some people are really using that as an activist life hack to kind of quickly change up their message and personalize it. And after you send the email, pick up the phone and make the phone call too. That's even better. So those couple of things, just adding a few minutes to that advocacy can really change the amount of impact you can make. And it's already been said, but it's worth repeating that passing legislation is really about building personal relationships and relationship building with legislators. And so as a constituent, you do have a lot of opportunities to have contact with your legislators and staff if you choose to. And it really is one of the most effective ways that you can influence legislation. So it just takes a little bit of extra effort. You want to do your homework, you want to research who your legislators are, obviously, find out who represents you at the local, state, and federal level. Visit their websites, learn more about them, see what issues they care about, what laws they've championed. Try to find somewhere in their bio or their background some common ground with yourself that you feel like you could connect with them on. Put your name on their mailing list, follow them on their social media platforms. Social media is a good way that you can interact with legislators and bring up these animal issues by chiming in to the conversations that they're having on social media. And look at their calendars, see when they're in your district, are they hosting a town hall meeting you can attend? Sometimes these are virtual. You can bring a question to those town hall meetings and really bring the animals into that meeting and talk about protecting them. You can also see they might be, attending an event locally that you can attend and introduce yourself. I guess, there's really a lot that people can do. If you have the time and a little bit of extra energy, you can really make a difference in influencing the legislation in your local, state, and at the federal level too. So never underestimate the contact and building rapport with staff as well. Some people get put off if they get a meeting with a staff member, but really these meetings are very valuable. This is kind of how government works at all levels, and those staff members, if you make a good impression on them, that is going to translate. They're the ones who are, they have the most contact with legislators, and they're also informing them about what constituents care about. So, you can always reach out to all these organizations to do more, to learn more. We'd love to work with you on getting more involved.
Those are some really great ideas. And I think from a handful of campaigns that I've worked on specifically for farmed animal protection, I think one of the great surprises we're working with supporters and advocates and exploring their sphere of influence, their network. Who do they know? And that goes for each and every one of us, regardless of how long we've either been working in the movement or engaged on certain issues. Really to take a moment and think about who you know. Oftentimes it could be 1 or 2 degrees of separation from a key legislator, the Senate president, the governor. Did somebody in your family go to school with someone, or do you know a prominent community member who could amplify the message on a particular issue? And so I think all of these multifaceted approaches to getting to, again, those key decision makers is really essential in hearing from a variety of people and not just a national organization or a single advocate who is known to be like the animal person. I think is really important because it again just allows us to share our message and the message of farm animal protection in particular more widely. So agree completely. And I think if everybody can take a moment, just to think about who they know and then reach out to the organizations that they're working with on farm animal protection and be like, I think I have a neighbor who knows somebody here, and do the outreach. Don't be afraid to do the outreach. Our voice is the voice for animals. So thank you, Matt. And Alex, if advocates don't have an opportunity to take action in their locality or their state, what are some ways that advocates can support the work that organizations are leading at the federal level? Is there anything more that they can do outside of those action alerts?
Great question. I think I would say a few things here. First of all, the action alerts I just want to underscore, are very important as well for the federal legislation. Everything that Matt said, I just want to completely agree. And also mention that when you do those, it's not just the office that may see them, the organization knows. And so sometimes I'll go into a meeting and they'll say, oh, I'm not sure if we've heard about this. And I have been able to maybe check the records on how many action alerts we've had for a certain representative districts or for a certain state and say, actually, you've had 35 people write in about this over the last couple of weeks. And so it also gives us, once we get in the room, more leverage to indicate to them that your words matter. So I just want folks to know that too. It helps us do our jobs better while also giving you a chance to speak up and contact those staffers directly. One thing I would say outside of the action alerts is that, if you want to work on supporting a federal piece of legislation, sometimes social media and taking to your sphere of influence to bring other people into the fold. If you want to reshare something on Twitter, now X, or an Instagram live that an organization's doing about a bill that you want other people to watch, sometimes doing the action alert and send it to 10 friends and just say, let's all get together, eat some good plant-based food. And sometimes we've heard of folks organizing sort of an action party at a local coffee shop where they're going to get together and help each other write those in. And then thinking about just community. Are there things and issues for your club at your college for students who might want to engage on federal work? We last year, we're doing an event in DC to shift the Farm Bill, led by the organization. And we brought in a bunch of folks for a really great event at Capitol Hill. But then we had 12 university groups around the country organize what we called satellite events to shift the Farm Bill, where they tuned into that event that was streamed from DC, and they took that chance to learn about the federal bills together and to write to their legislators, but to feel like they weren't doing it alone. We often find that is the thing that is prevents people from engaging sometimes, is it feels like I'm one person, there's this big federal bill happening in Washington, D.C., where's the incentive? And we understand that on a human level. And so sometimes if you reach out to organizations, we might have the ability to support an event like that. If it's something that you want to do at your high school, at your university, in your neighborhood, sometimes we have folks like we do at Farm Sanctuary who can help organize that, especially if it's on a bill that we're already supporting. And so sometimes just reaching out and asking, if you have an idea, reach out to us and see if it's something that we can help you with. More the merrier is really our default here. But I appreciate you asking that, Kathleen.
And greatly appreciate your reminder about social media. That is where politics are playing out. Tagging legislators in any post is really important too, to your point, and in that it may not be the legislator looking, but staff will certainly be looking. And again, it just amplifies the message. So yeah, really great point about social media. And Gabe, just kind of going back to some state action, it's been really exciting lately to see the great press with the octopus farming ban in Washington and the bill now in California, which really seems to have struck a chord with the public who rightfully see octopus as intelligent, sentient beings that should not be subjected to cruel treatment. So do you see this as an opportunity to further educate the press and public to make the connection that each farmed animal is also an individual? And just as a quick two-parter to this, do you see public perceptions and awareness of farmed animal welfare issues? Do you think that perception influences confinement bans, support for confinement bans?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, and if anybody watching this hasn't yet seen My Octopus Teacher, the documentary about how incredibly intelligent octopuses are, it's on Netflix. Recommend going watching that. And I think that having been in the zeitgeist in recent years has helped to garner a lot of public support for these octopus farming bans. Apologies if you hear a dog barking in the background, speaking up for how intelligent animals are. But so I do think that it's one of the reasons we've been able to pass octopus farming ban in Washington recently, and why there's some gaining traction in California and maybe other states soon, is partly recognizing how intelligent they are, partly because a lot of people don't eat octopus, so they don't have their internal defenses up against it so much. And also, octopus farming hasn't really arrived in our shores yet. The groups that are doing this are forward-looking and seeing that there was a plan to implement an octopus farm in Spain, and saying we don't want that to arrive here. So it's a lot easier to nip an industry in the bud before it really takes hold and before it gains political power and a powerful lobbying base in the country or state or locality where you're working in. And so I think that's partly why they were also able to get it done so quickly with relatively little resistance. But that's not to negate the win. I think it could be, if they didn't do that, I do think it would just be a matter of time before octopus farming did arrive in the United States and in these states. And so it's doing an incredible service for those animals. And I think that, yes, it's to your question, it's absolutely a way of starting to change people's minds and think more about, okay, well, if octopus are so smart and therefore shouldn't be treated in this cruel way, well, what about, I think I've heard pigs are really intelligent, and some people need to be educated more on how intelligent chickens really are, but they are quite intelligent, sentient, caring beings. And so that kind of public education can go a long way. But more so, maybe even more importantly, is that it's showing the public that legislators can step in and ban an entire area of farming if they want to. They can ban farming entire species if they want to. And they can also and it's showing legislators that, yeah, you can do this and you can be congratulated for doing it in the media if the public has been moved far enough along in their empathy for a certain kind of animal. So I think that the potential to build on these victories, not just for octopuses, but for other species that we're working to protect, is huge. It's just not every day that you see any kind of farming of animals being banned anywhere. So landmark victory in my mind in Washington State, and I do think there's more of those to come. And I think really the biggest impact of this long term is going to be creating more and more expectation and precedent for more and more bans of the cruelest practices and the cruelest kinds of farming across states, and hopefully eventually at the federal level too.
Yeah, and I think you're so right about the disconnect. And if many people are not eating octopus, that their defense mechanism may not be up. And Alex, I'm sure with Farm Sanctuary, there are probably many studies and stats and data, showing not that we even have to prove the intelligence of farmed animals. I mean, they're living, breathing beings that deserve respect on their own. But just wanted to ask you about that as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate you asking. I think sometimes in all of this talk about policy, and action alerts and what's happening on Capitol Hill, sometimes it's really nice to just be grounded in the reminder of who these animals are and the lives that they live and the emotions and the cognitive abilities that they have. The number of times I meet people in this movement and they tell me, I became a supporter, or it changed my thinking because I met a pig or a cow, or I came for a tour and I got to see the chickens. Like that just plants a seed, and sometimes it grows overnight and sometimes it takes some years. But I think we experience it firsthand when we meet those animals in a setting where they can be themselves, and they can experience the joys and also build friendships and communities. I didn't know really before I even started working at Farm Sanctuary and went there that pigs establish best friends, and they're very clean in particular about their living area, and that cows love chasing big bouncy balls, and we get to watch them do that and experience play. So I think we see that. But then another thing I'm really happy to share is that Farm Sanctuary had launched, our first of its kind research program on site in Watkins Glen, where our research team and our animal care teams are performing incredible studies on the impacts of PTSD on farm animals and on the joys of learning in chickens and other residents that we have. And those are run by an animal ethics advisory board. They've developed ways where the participation in those studies are voluntary, by the residents. So we're really trying to anchor it in their best interests. And, the New York Times came and did an exclusive on that research that was on the front page for Science in the New York Times. So just providing the research and the studies to underscore what I think many of us have come to learn to be true about these animals is really important for our movement to have that data to point to. And we're excited to be building the studies that we think will point to that.
I cannot wait for that, to see that. And when you talk about information, I just want to segue a moment for all of us, really, just to talk about the importance of coalitions. And I mean, there's just such synergy when it comes to farmed animal protection globally. And everybody is so willing to share information and, victories and perhaps, some areas that can be improved upon. I don't know that there's anything like it elsewhere outside of farmed animal protection. And so just wanted to kind of roundtable talk about the importance of coalitions. Maybe Gabe, if you want to jump in first on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's very little that we do in the farm animal protection space, at least in the United States, where my focus is, where we're not working in coalition. I know at the Humane League, we think of our organization as really just being a department of the larger movement, and we're all really on the same team and all have our own strengths and our own specific relationships that can be leveraged at the right times. So we have regular calls across the movement. I know all the organizations here, bi-weekly to meet about what we can collaborate on federally, what we can collaborate on at the state level. There's also separate bi-weekly meetings that have been happening specifically to coordinate defense against the EATS Act and other legislation that's threatening these confinement bans. And there's just, frankly, a lot of friendship, like some of my best friends in the movement are just folks that work in, not just my organization, but the other organizations on this call and across the movement. It's just, it's so rare, unfortunately, still to find people that have an interest in policy work and are also care so much about farmed animals and are dedicating their careers to this. So there's a true sense of community and camaraderie and a lot of trust built up across the organizations in this movement. And even when there's sometimes strategies and strategic preferences diverge, there's still a lot of just really good friendship as a baseline, so we can still coordinate as much as possible behind the scenes, if not overtly always being on the same campaigns together. So that's fantastic to see. And then at the local level, one of the main projects we've been working on at the Humane League in the recent years is putting together a new alliance called the Animal Policy Alliance. And that's an alliance of smaller groups working at the state and local level on policy for animals. And we meet on a monthly basis and also have online, and then have a hybrid summit annually where we bring the leaders of these different groups that are working towards local and state level policy wins for animals. And helping them to learn from one another, share strategies, coordinate when needed, when there is a big push at the federal level on something like the EATS Act, coordinate efforts, and make sure that they're not having to reinvent the wheel. And if they've already, had for instance, a foie gras ban success in one city, that other groups in other cities can learn from that success and borrow resources and materials and learn what the other groups had to learn the hard way when kicking off their campaigns. So. Again, like I was saying earlier, we're heavily outfunded when it comes to comparing us to our opponents, but we have way more good, dedicated people on our side and really strong coalitions. And I think that's one of the key strengths that we have that allow us to be kind of a successful David fighting this Goliath, if you will.
Yeah, no, and what a wonderful resource to kickstart, to just jumpstart and again, line everybody up for success, continued success. Alex or Matt, I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts on that as well.
Well, that was a really great answer, and I would just underline everything that was said and say, it's similarly, the Animal Legal Defense Fund is always working in coalition, both on our legislative efforts, but also on our litigation efforts. We also have coalition partners, like when we're fighting these ag-gag laws that do get passed and we're challenging them in court on their constitutionality. We often are working with other organizations as well. So this is something good to think about as an individual advocate. If you want to do something locally, really think about how that local effort can be connected to other efforts, and do the networking to find out what's already going on and make sure that you're not going to in some way inadvertently maybe harm something that's already in the works. You really want to keep those conversations open with other organizations and individuals so that we're all working together.
I don't have much more to add to those 2 points. I think both were just so eloquently put. The coalition work, so critical, and also just beyond the animal organizations, the folks working in environment and public health. I think we're having many, many more conversations in terms of strategy and in sharing of resources and saying, hey, this congressional lawmaker was open to this, maybe you guys should get in there. Just the planning that we're doing, and what Gabe said about learning from mistakes or from efforts that didn't go well because there's this powerful industry in this state, but maybe not, in that one. And so the planning that we can do as a collective movement together, I think, is getting stronger. I also just wanted to note that there's so much up and coming talent and passion in this movement. I think a couple of us had a wonderful opportunity to be at the National Animal Law competitions a couple weeks ago, and to see students and competitors competing and meeting and networking with professionals in the movement. And that's just very inspiring too. And so beyond, engaging as just someone who's passionate, if there's any interest in working in the field, I think any of us would be happy to provide guidance or to talk to folks, because the more people we can bring into this work, the better for the animals.
So true. And you know, I think you all may have touched upon this at some point during our conversation, but I mean, this issue, we hope there's a tipping point soon. We're certainly in an era of seeing more progress than we've seen since, you know, the beginning of the industrial age. And so for animals, I mean, the future certainly looks brighter now than ever. But this is a long-term effort. This is going to outlast, you know, perhaps my career. I'm not sure, you all are a bit younger than me, but it is multi-generational. And I do think that it's so important for people and advocates who are up and coming to get involved and to understand the areas of opportunity for you know, to explore again for greater success. And it is, again, long term. I see that we're getting close to the end of our session, so I want to look at the Q&A and just ask you all a few questions that we have in here. One question that we have posed is that it may be harder to access your legislator if you're not of the same party. And so do you all have any suggestions for that, how you might be able to present yourself, or again, any best practices?
Well, I can jump in and just say that, you know, those are, I would like to challenge people to think of those as good opportunities, because those contacts may be really important. And kind of going back to something I said earlier, is really trying to figure out if there's any common ground there at all. You know, is there anything on their platform or about them that you can find where you can sort of make some connection, and then start your conversation there. But I know that it can be very challenging to be in, you know, a district where you're not aligned on many things with your legislator.
I think the common ground point is critical, and also just to think about maybe a way to position the issue that you want to talk to about in a way that just might be more acceptable by them, or just to get them in the door to that conversation. You know, for example, there are a lot of folks who are on the ag committee who may not be ready to jump into a conversation about animal agriculture, but if you lead with, I want to stop, you know, industry from taking up all of the small farms in the state, and to talk about it sometimes maybe in terms of economic policy or just protections for the rural community, which you likely do support, you know, if that's an example of a place that you live. And so it's just speaking it up for it in terms of what might be the benefit that they would see as a way in the door. And then if you are lucky enough to get the phone call or to have a meeting, I think then that's a place where you can be a little bit more transparent. But the getting in the door just can require some creativity sometimes.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. I think maybe a couple of things I would add, maybe stating the obvious, but it's just to say it. If you are a different political stripe, they don't need to know that when you go in the door. They're not likely looking you up. Maybe they are, but unlikely. They're too busy most of the time. So don't need to mention that you didn't vote for them or you're not in the same party. And even if you can't identify any common ground, I think kind of getting to Alex's point, like a little bit further, just thinking about what it is that they care about and just saying, like, look, I know you care about this and this bill is going to affect you in this way, even if it's not necessarily an aspect of the bill that you care about. Like, so for instance, with the EATS Act, some Republican legislators maybe don't care about how environmental laws might be impacted the same way some Democratic legislators might be. That's a general, I'm not saying all Republicans would feel that way, just some Republicans, for instance. But they might care more about foreign multinational conglomerates having too much of a say. And you can see, maybe you want to focus on that argument, even if maybe there's not common ground for you. Maybe you're not so worried about foreign competition, but those legislators might be. So even if there's no common ground to saying, look, I know this is what you care about, so that's what I'm going to focus on in this conversation. They'll assume you care about it too, if that's what you're raising, and don't say otherwise. Yeah, so just would say that you don't necessarily need to show your political stripes while you're in the room, or show what it is that you're really there caring about this issue for, if it's not going to help your case while in the room. And you can do that without having to lie. You just don't mention the things that wouldn't be helpful.
Those are great, great ideas. And I think we're going to go with one more question before some final thoughts. Do the corporate pressure campaigns help hinder any of the policy work that is being done? And maybe Alex, we can start with you. Oh, no, Gabe, you unmuted first. The floor is yours.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I just saw THL mentioned in that specific question.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
because
I was
the
gonna leave that
Humane
to
League
you.
does, the Humane League that does do a lot of corporate campaigning to especially to pressure large companies, food companies, to go cage free with their eggs that they're selling. So I was definitely does not hinder our work on the policy front. It only helps it. This kind of a virtuous cycle where the more policies we can get past banning the sale of caged eggs, the easier it is to get companies to come on board. And the more big companies, especially big name brands like McDonald's, that come on board and say they're going cage free, that's an excellent talking point for legislators to assure them, like, look, this is a mainstream issue now. This is where society's going. So yeah, those two strategies only support each other and don't hinder in any way. And I would say the same thing with gestation crate bans, pressuring companies to get rid of pork that comes from mother sows that are kept in gestation crates. That those two things can only help each other, as long as you're careful about the kind of messaging you're using, making sure you're not saying anything conflicting on either front. But I haven't really seen that being the case.
Yeah, and I think this just goes to show that it really is a multifaceted issue that is going to require a multi-pronged approach towards greater protection for farmed animals. And I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to our friends in the plant-based community and the cultivated foods community as well, because that's such a large area to provide choice to consumers and to impact change, the overall change. So I do feel like with the, corporate and policy and again, consumer, that it's all lining up. So we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to give you all a moment if you'd like to talk about any final takeaways for the future of farmed animal protection. And I think, again, now we're going to go with you, Alex, Gabe, and Matt. How's that?
That sounds great. I can keep it short and sweet, just that the number of organizations actively working on, I'll say just from where I'm sitting, on federal policy, like the fact that we now run into each other on the Hill, and we've got folks, at briefings, at hearings to be up to date. I think we're investing more in policy than we ever have before for farmed animals, and to see that allocation of resources to policy from organizations, from funders, just increases our ability to fight for farmed animals in DC and across states. And so that's something I'm optimistic about. At the same time, industry also continues to put their money where their priorities are, and their lobbying power. And so it's a good fight that we're fighting. At the end of the day, I think we all feel a lot of reassurance just in being on the right side of history about this, and knowing that the work that we're doing, while it's an uphill battle, is worthy, and it's for individuals across the food system who otherwise wouldn't have their interests represented. And so I just want everyone to be very proud of that work, and to know that you're not alone. Even if you're just sending an action alert, you're part of this really broad community for farmed animals.
100% agree with all that. I'd say, like, yeah, try to find community if you can. If you don't have other people around you already engaging in policy work like this and lobbying legislators, like, please reach out to your friends and family and bring them with you to lobbying meetings. Get them to make phone calls with you. I know Alex was talking earlier about having like little parties where I think that's where you can do calling in or sending postcards in to legislators. And I think that's a fantastic thing to do. It is so important to be patient in this work. There's going to be gains and losses going back and forth. This is going to take many years. I just finished reading a book called Bury the Chains by Adam Hochschild, which I really recommend to anyone interested in where this movement is going. And that book is about the end of the transatlantic slave trade in the 1800s in Britain. And that was an industry that was seen as just as entrenched as factory farming is seen now in today's society. A lot of people thought it was laughable that you could ever end the slave trade. It was so ingrained in the economy at the time. But that was a 60-year campaign, and you can really see how it progressed over the decades. And there were years and even decades where the movement really was set back and it looked like they weren't going to get any further. But then time went on and things shifted, activists persisted, and eventually, well, the rest is literally history. The transatlantic slave trade did end. So I think that's a great lesson for us. We have to think multi-generationally and not let the setbacks get us down, and be, we've been saying recently, got to be aggressively, relentlessly patient in our work. And I think that one other thing I would add is we're heading into an election year. One other point, Matt's been saying a lot of great points about how you can connect with legislators. Another great way is to get out during election season, knock on doors for them, show them that you're showing up for them, helping them get elected. And that's a great way to build relationships too.
And I'll just add, we've talked a lot about the challenges, but I just want to end on a note of hope that one of our assets is the truth. We really do have the truth on our side, and we have a lot of evidence to back that up. We know what's happening to these animals. We know it's unacceptable. And when you really think about it, most people are compassionate. The treatment of these animals is not in alignment with really anyone's personal ethics. And so there is a lot of motivation to change that and to change the treatment of these animals, because it's unacceptable and we know it. So we can't give up, and we really hope that all of you will join us in our organizations in volunteering with us and working with us and passing these laws.
Thank you all. It is incredibly empowering to hear the ways that our organizations are working together and the individual actions that can impact efforts to protect farm animals. The good news is that you, as a consumer and a constituent, can influence change each and every day with the humane choices that you make. I'd like to thank you, Alex, Gabe, and Matt, for a really great conversation today. If we didn't get to your question, please send us an email at events@aldf.org. We greatly appreciate your participation and ask that you complete the feedback survey you will receive via email so we can improve future events. And please mark your calendar for the 32nd Annual Animal Law Conference, which will be held October 18th to the 20th, 2024 in Portland, Oregon, and online. We look forward to seeing many of you there. And I will now turn it over to Chris Green, ALDF's Executive Director, for some final remarks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, everyone on this panel. It was really super, just wonderful. Only caveat I would add to what Gabe said about going out and helping in the election, just make sure it's clear that you were doing it in your individual capacities for those of you working for nonprofits. Just to make sure the lines are clear there. And so that closes out our 2024 Animal Law Symposium on state animal confinement laws and the future of farmed animal policy.